Welcome to Tokyo Game Life, a Tokyo-based video game podcast focusing on Nintendo and gaming culture in Japan's capital. Your host Mono here to bring you a slice of gaming life from Tokyo. Today, JRPG superfan ChristophRPG joins as we chat about Dragon Quest III HD2D. We take a deep dive into this new version of one of the most important Japanese games ever. And the feature is all about Dragon Quest as well, as I give you all the details on Dragon Quest III's original Japanese launch in 1988. How many people were arrested? You gotta listen to find out. Let's jump into the games with ChristophRPG as we chat about Dragon Quest III HD2D. We're leading off with the game section this time as we dive into Dragon Quest III HD2D Remake, a brand new version of the 1988 classic NES game. A game too big for one person, so I'm joined by a very special guest. So guest, please introduce yourself.
Yes, hello. Thank you for having me. My name is Christoph. Go by ChristophRPG. I write stuff on X and Blue Sky about Dragon Quest. So thank you.
Thanks for joining the podcast. We're here to talk about one of the biggest games this year, at least in Japan, Dragon Quest III HD2D. And there's a lot to get into, but first, I want to hear more about what the series means to you. What's your history with the Dragon Quest franchise?
Oh man, well, my history with the Dragon Quest franchise is it's a really, really important franchise for me, because one of my most vivid memories of Dragon Quest are just, basically just gaming from a young age was when I played Dragon Quest VIII on my PS2. And I think that says a lot when a game gives you so fond memories. And I don't think I have those kinds of memories with other games. It's just Dragon Quest VIII. And even though I don't even think I went beyond like the 10-hour mark in terms of how long it takes for you to progress through the game, I think I only went to some of the earlier towns and then I got stuck. But I still have such fond memories with it. And then from that point on, I think this was around 2006 because it was quite late. It came out in Europe, where I'm from. And then from that point, I was just completely hooked.
Yeah, I'm a big Pokemon fan, so my first Dragon Quest game was none other than Dragon Quest Monsters on the Game Boy, which I really enjoyed. So when Dragon Quest III also came out on the Game Boy, I had to pick it up. And I do remember liking that game at the time, but it was quite hard. I think like you, I kind of dropped the game eventually, but it did have a big impact on me. But in the DS days, I got really into Dragon Quest IV, and especially 9, which I would say is my favorite. And I did play about half of Dragon Quest XI, but shamefully, I admit I kind of fell off with it. But I'm back on the Dragon Quest train with this new version of Dragon Quest III HD2D. A little bit of background on the game. It is developed by ArtDink, who also did Triangle Strategy. And on the Square side, we've got Team Asano and Square Enix Creative Studio 5, who mostly has a mobile game background. And of course, Yuji Horii is serving as the design supervisor of the game. But let's go all the way back to 2021, when the game was suddenly revealed in a Dragon Quest livestream. What was your reaction to seeing, they're remaking Dragon Quest III again?
I was completely stunned. I didn't know what to do, I think, because I saw it. The first thing that I thought about was Octopath Traveler, which is one of my all-time favorite JRPGs ever since it came out. And Octopath 2 is likewise one of the best JRPGs, personally. That announcement was it caught me off guard because obviously I knew right from the get-go what kind of game it was. I saw the actual protagonist and the art style, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing because it was literally my favorite art style combined with my favorite franchise. So I don't think I can remember even what I thought about because it was just so awesome. I think that's the best word to describe it. It was just awesome.
Yeah, I was pretty surprised because I did think, do we really need another remake of the game? Because it was remade on the Super Nintendo, and then it was remade on the Game Boy, and there are mobile remasters or just versions of the game. So you could play a version of Dragon Quest III on modern hardware. So I was a bit taken aback, but now that I'm playing it, I'm very glad they remade it, and I'm having a great time. And since you're more of an expert on the franchise than I am, let's get really into Dragon Quest III HD 2D. And I want to hear about what's been your biggest surprise with DQ3 HD 2D so far.
Oh man, that's a good question. To be honest, I think that it's just the whole idea of it being remade into a modern version because the game is, Dragon Quest III is an old game. Even the remasters, or whatever you want to call them, are kind of old games too, because they don't really do anything design-wise to change up the game. And then we have this remake, which completely changes up everything about the game. It's a completely new game. The first 10, 15-ish hours, I was completely taken aback because the game is just so fresh and new. Everything about the game is just obviously completely remade. But I think the biggest surprise for me was just how much of a remake it is. Everything from the ground up is completely remade. All the design philosophies, all the small things like the font and the icons, everything about the game has just been modernized. But the design philosophies are obviously the same because it's the same game, it's just remade. So I think it's just the complete revamp of the aesthetic design of all the elements.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like it's very faithful, more faithful than you would imagine. But of course, it's been overhauled in many significant ways. So it is an interesting balance between quote unquote modern game design, but it still has a lot of the core elements of Dragon Quest III, especially the great elements of Dragon Quest III and what made that game so interesting back in the day. And there are many, many new additions, and I don't want to list them all off one by one because there's hundreds maybe? But what new addition would you say is the one that grabbed you the most?
Obviously, not obviously, it is for me, but it is 100% the Monster Arena. And the recruitment of the monsters along with the Monster Wrangler. Absolutely perfectly done. The whole idea because Dragon Quest has the foundational value that Yuji Horii in his time in 85, 86, when he was making the first game, was that you are a hero. The player is a hero journeying, adventuring through a world where it's kind of the world along with you. That's the focal point. And the Monster Arena, along with recruiting the monsters with the Monster Wrangler, completely cements that it's the world that you are traveling through. That's the kind of the main, if not the simultaneous protagonist along with the hero. So when you travel through the world, you encounter these secret spots where you can, depending on it being day or night or morning or evening, you can encounter monsters and recruit them and battle with them in the Monster Arena. And I think I have spent many, 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 many hours doing exactly that. Just walking around the world, even before you, spoilers, can fly. Just walking around the world. And I think that's maybe 40% of my entire playtime. It's just walking around, exploring, encountering, and recruiting monsters. I think that's it, yeah.
Yeah, new classes was my most wonder request for the remake because it is a very class-focused game in terms of that's a major element of your team customization is changing up people's classes. And when they said, there's only going to be one new class, I was a little disappointed, but I'm very surprised about how integrated this class is into the world of the game. And it's a very fun class to use. So I do understand why it's only one, because they've added it in such a way that it's so integral to so many other elements of the game. And I kind of thought it would be like a blue mage at first, where you just take the monster powers, but it's quite different from that. So do you recommend when people are playing the game, do they just need to start with a Monster Wrangler in their party?
Oh yeah, 100%, definitely. I mean, the Monster Wrangler is not only a really important class or vocation in terms of how much content you are able to access early on, because recruiting monsters and fighting in the arena is a really fun break from the normal flow of the game. And when you can do that immediately, it just adds a whole nother layer to what you are doing at the beginning of the game. And especially because when you go through the world and you go from A to B, and sometimes you might not think about exactly where you are, because sometimes you just go off the beaten path and then you find this secret area and then there's a monster there. And if you don't have a Monster Wrangler early on, you're not able to recruit it. And so you have to go back later, and that can be a little frustrating if you can't remember where exactly that was. So, I mean, just by that alone, I think it's a good idea to have a Monster Wrangler, but also just because the classes or the vocation is extremely powerful. It's so strong.
Yeah, it's a very unique class where you have all these different abilities based on how many monsters you gathered, and they also have their own unique abilities as well. And I would definitely recommend people starting with it. Yeah, because you can get all the monsters that you find automatically if you have a monster wrangler in your party. And that's definitely one of the more fun things of the game that I'm really enjoying. And maybe even a lot of veterans of the game, this is a completely new element that they've added. And recently in the game, I guess mini spoilers, but you do get an item that reveals the identity of some monsters that are hiding as humans. And when I was journeying across the game, sometimes you would talk to somebody, and then after you talk to them, you understand very easily that this is not a human, or that this is a monster, or something is up with this person. So it's very fun to go back, and then with this item, you can reveal their true form. And then, oh yes, I was totally right. This is a monster. So that kind of thing is something I'm really enjoying.
Yes.
So we're digging into a lot of the new stuff, but I want to touch on the core game. How do you feel Dragon Quest III stands up as a JRPG today in 2024 compared to many of its contemporaries?
That's a hard question to ask a intensely biased person about when it comes to JRPGs. But if I'm trying to put off my biased pants for a moment, I would say that Dragon Quest is a franchise that has been here for almost 40 years now. And I think that because they have spent so many years building these games and these worlds, they have gathered so many design elements that makes JRPGs excellent. So I think Dragon Quest III Remake on its own is one of the best JRPGs, especially if you like classic JRPGs, because there's a huge difference between very modern designed JRPGs. If we take Metaphor ReFantasio that also came out this year, for example, Dragon Quest and Metaphor ReFantasio are two very different JRPGs. They compare nicely in terms of how good they are, because both are excellent, but in their own ways. Because Dragon Quest has always been about gameplay and the adventure, while many other JRPGs strayed away from that traditional way to look at a JRPG and have been more focused on systems and story. So from a gameplay perspective, Dragon Quest holds up. I think even some of the older Dragon Quest games, I mean, the original third game, Dragon Quest III, the original version, still holds up today just because the gameplay just so well made. So it is definitely up there. I mean, for me, it's the best JRPG of this year, of course. But I think many people agree that it's absolutely excellent. You can just see the reviews of some of the more mainstream gaming critics that has also praised it. It's got excellent reviews, so...
Yeah, what I'm really liking about the game is that while it is based on an 8-bit NES game, it still captures what makes JRPGs fun. You've got character building. It's a fair challenge. There are many interesting dungeons that are... I feel one thing that a lot of JRPGs these days have gone away from are dungeons, especially since I'm a big Pokemon fan. So they've totally gotten rid of all the dungeons in Pokemon, which makes me sad. But
Same.
when I'm playing this game, like, oh, they're pretty simple in idea. It's just like different floors and there's different branching paths. But each dungeon has something interesting about it. Like the pyramid, you walk into the middle, oh no, it's a trap. And then you fall down to the basement. And in the basement, you can't use magic. So even though this is a very simple idea, it works so well. And then there's another dungeon where pretty much every treasure box is a mimic. So you have to be aware of that. It's very basic in terms of a lot of the core ideas, but they do so many interesting things with it. I think it's maybe a bit of a disservice to call it quote unquote simple, since it really does nail a lot of the elements you want in an RPG. And especially since one thing that it really nails, I think, is definitely the character customization and the class and party composition. So while the battle system doesn't have a gimmick per se, the fun comes from managing all your skills and character roles. Do you have a favorite class, or what classes did you use during your run of the game?
I mean, actually, to be honest, I'm still going through the game because I just love the game so much. And when there's a game I love so much that I love this one, it's just, I don't want it to end. I want to keep playing. So I'm doing my absolute best to completely annihilate every single pixel of the entire world to get as much playtime out of it as possible. But at the moment, I guess it's kind of simple because I started with Monster Wrangler and Warrior and Mage. Yeah, because I know that the hero class traditionally always has had healing spells. So I thought, okay, I might not need a priest at the moment, also because I know that monster abilities usually have some kind of healing to it. I just didn't know that Soothing Song, which is one of the earlier spells, if not one of the starting abilities of a monster wrangler, can heal your party for 20 each. Amazing ability. So I haven't had the need for a priest at all. I found out was the popular thing with going hero, sage, monster wrangler. So that's what I'm doing right now as well. That's apparently the meta, I guess.
For me, I had a warrior who is now a thief, which is a good mix of unique offensive skills. And I changed my priest to a sage because, yeah, you need a sage, at least one. And I might change my monster wrangler later, but I do want to kind of find a lot of the monsters before I switch over. So the class system in the game, it has a lot of depth for what is at its core an NES game. But again, going back to what makes this game great, I do love how light the story is. There's no bloated cutscenes. Your direction is just, hey, there's a thing you need, go get it. And you're free to explore. What do you think about the story structure of Dragon Quest III? And are there any story beats in this new version that surprised you?
Oh man, okay, so the story of Dragon Quest, it has always been the most simple yet effective thing that they have done in terms of, because as exactly as you say, it's just, there's a king who says, there's a bad guy, go deal with him. Okay, bye. And then you're just there. Okay, now I have to deal with this guy. And okay, I guess I'll just walk up this way. And then you talk to someone who says, oh, there's a thing happening here. You can't pass unless you do this. And then you do that. So it's just you do the things because people say that I'm having trouble with this thing. And then you just go help them and do that. So the, vignette kind of storytelling is absolutely amazing. Because as you also said, there's no bloated cutscenes. There's no bloated story beats. There's no greater thing that happens every time you take a step. It's just you walking through the world with an objective in mind. And then obviously you get multiple objectives because you have to go deal with this guy somehow, and you deal with him by doing these things, gathering orbs or whatever. In terms of the story, I think it's excellent because it's you, the player, who is motivated to do the thing. A guy called Ego Raptor, I'm sure many people know him. He made an excellent video about exactly this, about how you want to do the thing, not because some other person in the game tells you that you want to do the thing. And Dragon Quest is just a game that throws you into a world and say, go play. And then you go play, and then you have a connection to the world and to the characters and to your avatar in the game because you want to help the world, because the world is also the protagonist. You want to help the world. You want to help the world's people because they're suffering. It's not because someone tells you that you have to help them. You have to defeat this guy because people are suffering, because you see it yourself. And the vignette kind of smaller contained stories is just part of the greater plot of you going through the world, helping it. And the end goal is to defeat the guy that the king or whatever at the beginning told you to go. So I think it's absolutely excellent.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And that's a very interesting perspective about how the world is also kind of a character in itself. And for me, a lot of the story is new since I never beat the Game Boy version. And it is effective in using a little to say a lot. For example, early on in the game, I went to a town and everyone was asleep. So this is immediately interesting. Now I'm invested in what's going on here. And then I find a guy who's awake and he tells me, go to this cave. And on the way to the cave, I find a fairy village, which again, it looks incredible. It looks fantastical. And I get a bit of direction there. And then I explore a fairly challenging dungeon. I get an item, and then I come back and I wake everyone up to continue the quest. And this is all done with about maybe 5 lines of dialogue. But the game is great at using really evocative imagery and interesting scenarios to help push you along instead of very long and talky cutscenes. And it's very smart in when they do use more involved cutscenes and dialogue sections. And speaking of that, well, what do you think about the voice acting, which is completely new to this version of the game?
I still haven't gotten used to there being voice acting. I think it's so, it's almost uncanny because it's kind of, far in between.
Yes.
the voice acting, especially if you just like me, just like walking around and grinding, just finding the secret areas, and because then the story gets stretched out quite a bit, which is perfect for me. But I think the voice acting I think it's really, really good. I always play Dragon Quest in Japanese. I always play Dragon Quest in its original form. I like to play games generally in its original form, unless the game is telling me that this English version is the best for you with the marketing and stuff. But I always play Dragon Quest in Japanese. So I think it's a little difficult for me to judge it based on that. But the emotion that it evokes within me when I hear the voice acting and when the story is there, and obviously I have subtitles so I know what's going on, but the emotion that it evokes, which is, I think, the most important part of voice acting, it has to evoke the emotion that the game is trying to evoke to you, which it does perfectly. So I think the voice acting it's great just based on the voice acting, but it's also great that there is voice acting.
Yeah, and it's not used too often. It's used actually fairly sparingly. So I do get kind of surprised every now and then where I think, oh, this game actually has voice acting. I forgot because I was exploring all this for hours until I found a story cutscene, and then suddenly the boss is talking to me.
Exactly.
What about the visuals, which is, of course, a major element of this game? It actually changed quite a bit compared to the first time we ever saw the game during the Dragon Quest live stream 3 years ago. Are you liking this style they went with, or would you have preferred something similar to the original trailer?
I think that, exactly as you say, I was surprised when I saw the progression of the visuals of the trailers and then, of course, the final game. Because the first trailer was very akin to Octopath Traveler's visuals. And I think that they have gone with the best way they could have gone about it in terms of the final game, because it's actually kind of a mix, I think, between the visuals of Dragon Quest XI and Octopath Traveler, which is the 2D HD2D game that I'm referring to, because that's the one I remember most. But I think that mix is perfect because it's still very Dragon Quest. It's not too akin to Team Asano's other games. It's still Dragon Quest, but you can clearly see that it's Team Asano who is doing the HD2D artworks. And I think that the visual style, it started off being I was a little put off by it at the very beginning because it was different from what I had in mind, but it has grown on me so that I think that it's the perfect fit because, as I said, it's a healthy mix between the classic Team Asano HD2D and Dragon Quest XI's kind of revitalized Dragon Quest art style. So I think the visuals themselves they're exactly where they're supposed to be. Also, some of the areas are just extremely gorgeous. Even I'm playing on the Switch. I'm playing docked Switch, and my Switch is the old one from 2017. It's obviously an old Switch, but it's still just so beautiful because the art direction is so good. And some of the areas are just completely mind-blowing. Like the Shrine of the Everbird is so beautiful. The Pirate's Den, so many areas are just so beautiful.
Yeah, even though it's called HD2D, the 2D elements are somewhat slim. You've got the character and monster sprites, but a lot of the buildings and much of the world is in 3D. So it's getting a bit blurry about what is HD2D and what is just regular 3D, but this game kind of blends both. And yeah, the original trailer almost seemed more like a one-to-one reskin of the original game, but now they've made the world much larger, especially the overworld. And this game is reminding me, overworlds, we should just bring them back. I know technically we don't need them anymore, since many games are fairly seamless in terms of what's a town, what's the field, but seeing the lights of a town off in the distance when you're exploring the overworld, that's just pure magic. Do you like overworlds, or would you have preferred something a bit more seamless?
I mean, I 100% agree with you. I love overworlds. The first actual taste of an overworld was when I played Wild Arms for the PS1 when I was a snot-nosed little child and I couldn't get past the first town. But then I also got Golden Sun 2, which also has overworlds. And I just remember that at that point when I was a child, I didn't want any other game. I wanted games that had turn-based combat and overworlds. That was literally my two favorite things about games when I was that age. And that has absolutely shaped my view about how I view overworlds. And how to travel through worlds in general. So I think that overworlds, like you say, absolutely should come back. I love overworlds because exactly like you say, that when you see a town in the distance, especially at nighttime, and you see the city lights and whatnot, there's just something there. Also, when you spot a little shrine in the middle of some place that you wouldn't think had something, and then you enter, and then it's some really important place where there is a gate that you cannot go through yet, and there's a chest inside, and there's just so many secrets to uncover and so many things to do with an overworld like this, because it can make the world so much larger, because the overworld is basically just you going from A to B, but the areas that the overworld can offer you, like a little shrine, can be kind of enormous. There are so many almost endless possibilities in terms of what you can do with the world like this. But yeah, I love overworlds in this way. Absolutely.
So we're getting Dragon Quest 1 and 2 next year in the same style. So by the laws of math, the ones after that are 4, 5, and 6. Would you like to see those games in the same art style, or do you want them to try something new?
I mean, I do like math, so I think we should trust math. And I think that Square Enix and Armor Project and Yuji Horii should count to at least 9 in terms of math. But I think that 4, 5, and 6, the Zenithian trilogy is... I think every fan is just starving to get some more Zenithian trilogy, because it's kind of the ultimate JRPG trilogy. And if I'm to describe Dragon Quest to someone, I would probably pick 4 or 5 or 6, just because it's that game, especially the DS versions, are just so, to me, so Dragon Quest. And I think that especially because we know that Dragon Quest 3 here, the remake, HD2D remake, is selling. I mean, I think it's kind of assured that it's selling really well, and probably then by that account, 1 and 2 collection will also sell well. And I think it's probably just a matter of time. But seeing 4, 5, and 6 remade in this style would be, I mean, a dream come true, basically, especially for a Dragon Quest fan, but also just for JRPG fans in general, I think.
Yeah, I've never played Dragon Quest 1 and 2, and I always assumed, well, just 3 is better. But I'm really having such a great time with 3 that I'm quite interested in 1 and 2, even though it's maybe not quote unquote as good. But if they take a lot of the new elements from this game and put them into 1 and 2, I'll definitely be very interested. And yeah, 4, 5, and 6, it did have the Western releases on the DS, which I'm pretty sure they did sell quite well. But Dragon Quest 5, especially in Japan, that's one of the upper tier echelon games in terms of what do Japanese people hold as quote unquote the best game of all time. A lot of them would put Dragon Quest 5 up top. So I think there's probably a lot of interest in at least making Dragon Quest 5. I do kind of wonder, will they just skip to 5 and then do 4 and 6 later? That's something that might be possible. But if they just do 4, 5, and 6 in that order, I still think the interest will not diminish once 5 comes out, if they still want to do 4. All right, I guess final verdict, would you recommend Dragon Quest 3 HD2D to JRPG fans?
No, I'm kidding. I mean, no. It's the game now, along with 11, that I would say if you are at least interested in some way in Dragon Quest, you should pick up that. I think 3 Remake has now... It has been shot up next to Dragon Quest 11 as right now the definitive Dragon Quest. In terms of JRPGs, Dragon Quest is the grandfather of modern JRPGs. It's the foundational philosophies of design that has made every single modern JRPG what they are today. So many elements of Dragon Quest has inspired so many developers to make other JRPGs. And Dragon Quest is just, even if you find Dragon Quest to be kind of maybe a little too, I guess, classic or traditional, I think that playing Dragon Quest as a JRPG fan you would do yourself a disservice if you didn't at least play some Dragon Quest. And if you want to play at least some Dragon Quest, you should pick the one that, the ones that I guess would be good for newcomers of the franchise, and that would be 3 HD2D Remake and 11, and those two will probably just hook you into the franchise forever. I will definitely recommend Dragon Quest III HD2D Remake to absolutely anyone with an inkling of an interest to play a JRPG.
Yeah, I'm having a ton of fun with the game. I think some newer JRPG fans might be off-put by its lack of focus on story, but if you want a classic, no-nonsense RPG, a big world to explore, challenging dungeons, great visuals and music, an interesting class system, you can find a lot of beauty in Dragon Quest III HD2D. All right, so ChristophRPG, where can people find you?
People can find me on Twitter. I guess X will be the correct thing to say. It's just ChristophRPG. Also on Blue Sky. I show over Dragon Quest primarily, pretty much every day, every other day. I'm also kind of working on doing some videos, actually. I'm actually recording while I'm playing Dragon Quest III HD2D Remake, and I've been recording when I play Dragon Quest IV some months ago, and also Dragon Quest XI. So I'm working on some fun things for YouTube, but right now it's just on X and Blue Sky. It's just ChristophRPG. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was a ton of fun talking. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yes, and listeners, the links to everything will be in the podcast description, so check it out. ChristophRPG, once again, thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Today's feature is going to be a little different. Normally, I focus on a place to visit in Tokyo or highlight a mostly Japan-only video game franchise. But since part of my podcast description is, quote, gaming culture in Japan's capital, well, I think this fits perfectly in line with that, as I want to explore Dragon Quest III's original launch in Japan all the way back in 1988. It's one of gaming legends, but there's a lot of misconceptions and a lot of new things I learned when researching about that fateful day. Now, sadly, I was not in line to buy Dragon Quest III in Japan in 1988, but it is a very well-documented event, especially in Japanese. TBS, a TV station in Japan, uploaded just last year some great high-quality B-roll of that day to their channel, so it's definitely something that is a major moment in Japanese gaming history. For this feature, I read whatever Japanese article I could find about it and watched a lot of Japanese news reports from the time, which are a ton of fun, so I will mostly focus on those. I don't want to spend too much time on the history of Dragon Quest, but Dragon Quest I came out in 1986 and it was an immediate hit. It brought the RPG genre to new audiences, especially kids. It's funny to think that now, DQ1, many people would consider it to be quite hard and unforgiving, but it was specifically designed to be very easy to get into and play. It was the best-selling game in Japan for months after its release, and less than a year later, Dragon Quest II hit the market in 1987. While the Dragon Quest III launch is perhaps the most famous, ironically, many of the things the Dragon Quest III launch is famous for did actually happen during Dragon Quest II's launch as well. People lined up for the game before launch, and many shops were sold out day one. And it kept topping the charts for months in Japan. During this time, the phrase Dragon Quest Gensho, or Dragon Quest Phenomenon, entered the Japanese lexicon. So the furor around Dragon Quest III's launch, it wasn't a surprise. Considering 3 was such a huge jump from the first two titles in scope, and Dragon Quest had quickly made its mark on Japanese pop culture, and the Famicom is now a household name, everything fell into place for it to be the biggest launch in Japanese gaming history. Now, it came out on Wednesday, February 10th, 1988. A few things. February in Tokyo, it's very, very cold. You don't want to be standing somewhere at 5 a.m. in February. Also, Wednesday, aka a weekday. This is something that many Western gamers have heard about, but the myth is that the Japanese government forced Enix to release Dragon Quest games on the weekend to prevent the truancy and other issues that arose during Dragon Quest III's launch day. This is not true, as the government didn't make them do anything. Enix themselves decided this. But indeed, Dragon Quest IV would launch on a Sunday, and the last new Dragon Quest game, 11, launched on a Saturday, so they are still keeping this release schedule. Except for spin-offs and remakes, apparently, since Dragon Quest III HD2D was just released on a Thursday. So if you're shopping for video games in Tokyo in 1988, where do you go? Ironically, a lot of the same places you would go to today. One of the more famous lines was at Big Camera East Exit Store in Ikebukuro, a store that is still around today. In fact, before Dragon Quest III HD2D launched, they actually had a display board with photos of the original launch day. Now, the 1988 launch was at what is now the Big Camera Outlet Shop, So there's a different big camera closer to the station that had the signs of the photos. So technically the photos are at a different place, but these two buildings are still there and they're still big camera. Just going the extra effort to make a little display board is fantastic and really shows the pride of taking part in such a major moment. This big camera apparently had a line of over 10,000 people. I don't know how built up Ikebukuro was in the 80s, but I cannot imagine a line of 10,000 people in front of the Ikebukuro big camera today. It would be more crowded than Shibuya Scramble. And again, this is outside in February. I did see in one report that at a different department store, the line was inside, going from the 8th floor all the way to the 1st floor. But hey, at least you are inside. And you can at least gauge your progress a bit. Okay, I'm on the 3rd floor now, almost there. The TBS video I mentioned earlier had a lot of footage from Shinjuku, and they often showed Sakuraya, which was another major electronics chain. It started all the way back in the 1940s in Shinjuku, just like Yodobashi Camera. However, in 2010, all Sakuraya stores closed down, and the main shop shown in the video is now a Bic Camera. But the exterior still looks pretty similar, just the name is different. But a lot of that TBS B-roll is here, outside of what is now the Bic Camera Shinjuku East Exit store. This is a place I've seen many times, so I did get a kick out of seeing it have some sort of historical importance. It's not a top-tier Bic Camera for me, but it is very important in terms of the history of Japanese gaming releases. It showed a massive line all the way down the street, a street that now has the Marui Annex with Surugaya, a huge Bic Camera Uniqlo combo shop, and a gigantic Disney store as well, maybe the biggest one in Tokyo. But many know it for its large Isetan department store as well. And if you go here on Sunday afternoon, they close off the street from cars, so you can walk in the street for some great photo ops, or if you just want to unleash your inner jaywalker. Many news reports from the time have a lot of footage from here, with Sakuraya staff communicating with each other via the walkie-talkie, and they're all wearing these Sakuraya branded jackets, which do look kind of cool. I can easily see one of these jackets being an expensive item in a vintage clothing store somewhere. The footage also shows that they used a numbered ticket system to prevent the lines from just spiraling out of control. So if you had a ticket, you could come back and buy the game. The tickets also had this big DQ3 logo on it, and the footage shows some customers handing it over to the staff, and then they get the game already inserted in a plastic bag, so you can't really actually see it. Other shops seem to do this too, as another report said that a Yodobashi store handed out over 1,500 tickets in one day. This is still a common practice in Japan. Just line up for any Pokemon pop-up shop and you'll see. Also, I did see in a video that one shop was handing out tickets on February 7th to buy the game on the 10th. So some people were lining up for that, and then they returned a few days later. But it seemed like most shops didn't do this practice. And yes, Japanese TV did interview a lot of people in line. One I saw was a college kid who said he got there at midnight the day before, which sounds like something I would do in college. It is pretty interesting to see that a lot of adults are in line to buy the game. I think many of us assume that adults playing games is a recent phenomenon, but the Famicom alone had its fair share of adult fans, or at least college-aged fans. One was interviewed after he picked up the game, and the newscaster asked, "What are you going to do when you go home?" And he said, "Sleep." Hey, you got the game, nobody said anything about playing it at launch. A middle-aged dad was also interviewed, and he got there around 8 a.m., so a few hours before the store opened. Which, honestly, these days, showing up 3 hours before a store opens is not that insane for a major launch, but back in the 80s, it was pretty unheard of. The reporter also tried to talk to high schoolers who looked like they were in their high school uniforms, but they tried to avoid the camera. Which leads to another memorable element of the launch. Many kids were apprehended due to truancy, aka they skipped school to buy Dragon Quest III. And who can blame them? I've got the numbers. 283 kids were apprehended for truancy in Tokyo alone. Ikebukuro also had 26 officers on patrol for the event. This was definitely a hot topic, and a lot of the news stories talking about the launch really focused on the kids are skipping school to play Dragon Quest angle. So again, Enix got really proactive with the release dates on future games. Some other random footage I got a kick out of. I love all the segments of reporters in the studio holding a Dragon Quest III cart and kind of explaining what it is. A lot of them are mystified by its form factor. Also, Japanese 80s newscaster fashion is truly insane. It looks like everybody was inserted into a giant cloth cube. Some other fun footage includes video of them unloading the trucks with the big cardboard boxes with the games. And on these boxes, they have a big DQ3 logo stamped on it. Okay, now I just want to rattle off some of my favorite people they talked to in these news reports. There's a lot of exasperated parents who were like, "What? Why is the line so long?" They talked to a college-aged girl, and they asked her what's so interesting about the game. She says that you can see yourself in the characters and then says, "You should try it," while she playfully hits the reporter. There's also a random foreigner interviewed who has no idea what is going on, and in English he says, quote, "What are they giving away? If you are this man, please come on my podcast." A grandma is also interviewed, and the reporter asks her, "What is Dragon Quest III?" And she's like, "I don't know. I'm buying it for my grandson." They also talked to another shy woman who is in line to buy the game for her husband, and they interviewed some college kid who had a cold, and he is completely wrapped up in a blanket. So many people did endure the elements to get Dragon Quest III on day one. And one of my favorite guys, he's got on this black jacket, sunglasses, he's got kind of a slicked back pompadour style hair, and he looks like he could easily fit right into Yakuza 0. The reporter asks him, "What interest do you have besides the Famicom?" And he waits a second and he just says, "None." Perfect. There was another video where it locked onto this kid, and then you could hear the announcement of the store saying that they were totally sold out. And this kid looked absolutely devastated. I hope he eventually got to play Dragon Quest III. The game sold over 1 million copies on day one, and needless to say, many stores were completely sold out. There's a lot of footage of staff posting and carrying signs saying Dragon Quest III sold out, and for them to come back tomorrow or another day. Of course, the game had quite a long tail on the Famicom and beyond. But the original launch, easily one of the most famous and memorable video game launches in Japanese history. With digital gaming, I don't think it will ever be topped, and an important thing to note, everybody lining up here was there to buy the game for themselves or a loved one. Maybe some wanted to flip it, but the resale ecosystem wasn't as developed as it is today. Like, when Switch 2 comes out, how many people in line are going to buy it for themselves, and how many people are going to buy it just to resell it? There is a sense of passion in these videos where everybody who was interviewed was very intent on buying the game to enjoy it. While we may never see a launch like this again, just a few days after Dragon Quest III HD2D launched in Japan, many stores put up signs saying that the Switch version was completely sold out. So some things never change. All right, that's it for the feature. Now for the news. A lot of things are popping off in Tokyo. If you can believe it, there's yet another Earthbound pop-up shop titled Mother no Bazaar that's happening in Shinjuku Sumitomo Building this January 9th to 15th. The big new item are Mother 2 branded Converse sneakers. These are just white sneakers with Mr. Saturn pixels on it, but we have yet to have Mother shoes, so Itoi can't let that market slip away. The shop is only for about a week, and you do need a reservation on the first day, so be aware of that. Another Nintendo collab happening soon is that Heinz will have a special Kirby branded ketchup. No, not pink ketchup, but instead Kirby is just on the package with 9 different designs. I'm normally a sucker for this type of stuff and will just eat any Nintendo collaboration food, but I can't say I saw this and thought, man, I gotta get that ketchup. It's almost Valentine's Day, so I need to save my money for the Pokemon chocolate I get every year. There's a few events still going on in Tokyo. Obviously, the Pokemon Koge exhibit is happening until February. Go listen to my previous episode about that awesome exhibit if you haven't yet. The Super Mario Marunouchi Illumination event is also happening right now around Tokyo Station. It's going on until January, and I would definitely cover it on the podcast in a future episode, but as a teaser, I highly enjoyed it and you'll get a kick out of it if you're a Mario fan. There's also a Noja pop-up shop happening right now at Shibuya Parko for the next few weeks, so Noja fans, get out there. And Nintendo may be done with releasing new games this year, or are they? Because we've gotten a flurry of NSO titles, including Donkey Kong Land 1 and 2. These are the first 2 Game Boy DK platformer titles developed by Rare, so it wasn't licensed to somebody else. Visually, they look pretty rough, but they were very popular games back in the day. The first DK Land game sold 3.91 million copies. That's more than any Metroid, more than any Pikmin game, although hopefully Pikmin 4 hits 4 million units soon. DK was truly the king of the 90s. And DK Land 2? That still sold over 2 million copies. And this was in the 90s when selling over 1 million was seen as an incredible accomplishment. These are definitely games people might not consider classics, but they were bona fide hits. And the DK Land series has insane titling in Japan. DK Land is called Super Donkey Kong GB, and DK Land 2 is just Donkey Kong Land. I can only assume that Donkey Kong Land 3 is coming sooner than later. But hey, Nintendo, you know we want Donkey Kong 94. I'll even take King of Swing, since I do kind of want to try that. And shockingly, we got new Genesis games, including ToeJam and Earl on Planet Funkotron, Vector Man, and Wolf of the Battlefield Mercs, a game that I admittedly have never heard of before. It's almost been a year and a half since we got new Genesis games, so I'm glad there's some life in what is easily my most ignored NSO app. But there's a lot of great games on that thing. But I am waiting for Sega to take some real swings at bringing back the Saturn catalog. Saturn NSO. That would be pretty killer, I can't lie. At least the Japanese version of the app. All right, this was a fairly light news week, so let's just end it here. Thanks as always for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast on your favorite app. Leave a 5-star review as well. It helps with visibility. The podcast is also available on YouTube, so like and subscribe there as well. I'm on Twitter, Threads, Blue Sky, Instagram. Just search for Tokyo Game Life or find the links in the podcast description. If you like the podcast, be sure to share it with your friends and on social media. If there's anything you want to talk about or cover, just message me on Twitter. The next episode will be on December 15th. See you next time. Matane!